So, welcome, Dr. Kristin Wild. Welcome, 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 welcome to the podcast. It's very lovely to have you eventually. Like we've been chasing each other's tails for how long?
I know.
We had an original meeting, God, it must be 6-7 weeks ago.
Mhm.
And had a really lovely session about and then we were kind of, oh, let's get this podcast recorded, and one thing and another.
Yeah.
You're off doing lovely exciting things, and life has a funny way of taking over, and we're only here today. And I've been telling loads of our followers, loads of our listeners, and especially in the groups that we teach, I've been telling a lot of people that this has been coming because I've been looking forward to it.
Mhm.
And the reason that I've been looking forward to it is because we get a lot of people asking, do we directly work with autoimmune?
Mhm.
And my answer is always not directly, no. No, we will work with the trauma that might have caused autoimmune, but we don't work with the autoimmune. And that's where your expertise comes in. Isn't that right? Is that fair?
Very fair. Yes.
Okay. So that will set up the podcast. That'll set up where we're about to go. So if you're listening to this and you're struggling with autoimmune, you've been diagnosed with autoimmune, you know the trauma is possibly at the heart of it, then you are going to really enjoy and love and learn so much from this wondrous, wondrous woman in front of me and you that you're listening to. So without further ado, I'm going to let Kristin explain and tell us a wee bit about herself and tell us a wee bit about her story. So we're going to meander for a while through Kristin's story. And then what I'm going to do is, for our listeners, I'm going to kind of stop and meander around certain parts and ask certain questions. And by the way, for anybody who's listening to this, none of this is pre-prepared. This is just a let us see how it goes and let's see what we can do to be of service to you today. So that's where we're going to start. Kristin, work away. Tell us a wee bit about yourself.
Sure. As so many people, it's like a long and twisted tale, but I will get straight to it. And then there's side stories. And so every time I tell my story, I feel like a new piece pops in. So essentially, where I am today, I'll start there and then kind of explain how I ended up here, because I'm a holistic health educator and speaker. And before this, I was an entrepreneur, real estate investor. This isn't something that I thought I would be doing in my life at all. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so grateful every single day that I get to be a part of people's healing experience. And we get to, share new information that is not common knowledge. Yes. And so, a lot of us in these fields, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is we're like pioneers. Yes. And so it's really an exciting place to be. So I work with women, myself and my team do. We work with women with autoimmune. That's where we are honed right in, and that's where we shine. So we have a 93% success rate. Wow. And for good reason. So I myself went through that experience. Often we learn what we have to learn. And in my case, I had no choice. It was do or die. And so it all started for me a few weeks after my second daughter was born. She was born by C-section, and so was my first daughter, and they were born 16 months apart. So I really put my body through the ringer. And through that, I was also real estate agent, and I didn't take a maternity leave. So I just always depended on my body. I didn't even think about it. I was just going. Didn't realize how hard I was pushing myself and how much stress I was going through. I was also had a very difficult marriage. It was difficult through the whole thing. And so it was just one of those things. It was perfect storm. And a lot of people will say that when they start having autoimmune symptoms, there's always a trigger. In my case, I had mastitis. I had a bout of mastitis, and it turned into blood poisoning.
Oh,
I went to the hospital and I was delusional. I was not acting as myself at all. I barely remember the episode, but what happened is they didn't really know what to do with me because I was there with a baby. So they said, like, typically we would give you slow doses of antibiotics and keep you here for several days, but you have a baby with you. So we can't put you in the maternity ward because she's not new. And we can't put you in general because we can't have a baby with you there. So what we're going to do is give you a super dose of antibiotics. We'll give you all that we would have given you over those course of multiple days tonight. So they did. And I went home. I felt pretty wiped out because here I was already recovering from surgery and doing these things. And 3 weeks later, I woke up and both my wrists felt like they were broken. I couldn't open doors. I couldn't really pick up my baby. I didn't really know what was going on. And it was one of those things because my mind couldn't go anywhere with it. I kind of went into denial. And then so weeks went by where it's like different bones in my body. It's like they took turns feeling like they were broken, and it would be the same on both sides. And I was like, okay, finally I went to my general practitioner and she said right away, she called it. She said, I think this is rheumatoid arthritis.
wow.
And I went, what's that?
From nowhere to rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah. And so this is the thing with autoimmune, it's coming.
Right.
It takes a long time to get there, but then there's a trigger. And once Pandora's out of the box,
okay,
it's putting her back in there. Not happening. Now you have to work through all that Pandora has brought you.
okay, brilliant. So in autoimmune, it is there, but it's dormant. And it's go ahead.
Yeah. So everyone has the capability of developing an autoimmune disease, actually. And so this is the genes that we carry. Then we'll have different symptoms. Some people get diabetes. Some people will get IBS. Some people will get Crohn's. Some will get thyroid issues. In my case, it started with rheumatoid arthritis. And actually, the further along it goes, and that was my story too, is they start developing more autoimmune because what's happened is your genes have down-regulated to the point where these diseases can now pop open.
Wow.
So once that's happened, if you keep doing what you're doing, it's never going to end. Yeah. And so this is a lot of why medications kind of seem to work in the beginning and then they stop working because it's working with the symptoms. Right. And the symptoms are just that, symptoms. Autoimmune baseline. Yeah. Autoimmune baseline, it's all the same. It's a degeneration of the genes.
So that's what autoimmune baseline is, a degeneration of the genes. And that degeneration of the genes can be caused by trauma, can be caused.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And multiple forms of trauma. So that could be physical trauma, so the pregnancy. And then, I mean, I only work with women, so I can only speak to women, but yes, women, there is a common theme of personalities and the type of people that get really sick with autoimmune. And it's usually people that are go-getters. They, are constantly putting other people first. They'll take care of their family. They'll go to work. They'll do whatever they need to do to help people and help, and move forward. And they're usually highly intelligent, very capable, and they're the person that everybody comes to for help. And so this is a lot of women in general. So this is why we see so many of us. We're now at the point where 1 in 3 women will receive an autoimmune diagnosis. Like it's just out of control. And so, so continuing with my story with that is, so I went to the doctor and then she sent me to a rheumatologist. And so many people that with autoimmune listening to the story, they're going to go, yeah. It's very most stories are quite similar. So I went to the rheumatologist and she told me that I had a psychology issue. And she put this in my charts that I was suffering from postpartum and that this was all in my mind, essentially psychosomatic. And so there wasn't really much to do there. And so I went another 3 years going through an increase in the disease symptoms and not really knowing what to do or where to turn. And so I just kind of went into denial to the point where my hands were so swollen, I could barely pick anything up. I could barely walk on them. It felt like I was walking on marbles. And so I went back to my general practitioner, and she was like, this is an emergency. Like, this is not good. And sent me to another rheumatologist where I got an opposite diagnosis. It's like, you are so sick. How have you been going this long without care? And like, and what have you been doing? And I was like, okay. And so again, so this is the thing, is each turn you go here, often there's like a little bit of hope inspired that things are going to get better.
Yes.
And followed by disappointment. And it's just because those avenues are so good for so many other things, but not autoimmune. Autoimmune, it has, like you said, we can really dive into how the trauma actually creates this in our bodies, which is so interesting, which we'll really get into, because there is a very good explanation for this that science is now proven. And so it's really exciting.
Fantastic.
So yeah, but the medical system is not caught up to that yet. And that's okay. So it's not villainizing anyone. It's just, I tried the medication route. So they're like, you take these medications and then you won't be in as much pain, and it's going to, slow down the progression of the disease. And not one medication promises to eradicate the disease, because it doesn't work. Yeah. And so
I'm sure there's a lot of, in that medication, there's a lot of indications. There's a lot of contraindications and lots of other problems, and it creates other probable symptoms in the middle of all of that. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting blood this time too. I'm getting blood work. I'm learning how to self-inject myself with this medication that's essentially poison. It's a form of chemotherapy for people. They're supposed to be on it for a short amount of time, and I'm supposed to inject myself with it every week. It makes you so sick. And then I'm going for blood work once a month to make sure it doesn't shut down my liver. And I was just going like, this doesn't make sense. I was on another one that's supposed to be for people to prevent malaria. And ultimately you're supposed to take one pill once a week for 11 weeks, and that's it, because it can be harmful. And I'm supposed to take one of those pills every day forever. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And so I essentially just kind of stopped taking the medication. It just felt gross to me. And so I went in to the rheumatologist, and he was like, so you're not taking your medication? And I was like, how did you know? It's like kind of busted. And he said, I can see you're not filling your prescriptions. And I was like, oh, you can see that, can you? And
the recording didn't pick that up. He could see what? What could he see?
He could see that I wasn't filling my prescriptions. And I didn't realize. I was like, I didn't know you could see that.
Okay.
So then I came into a second time where I was told I had a psychology problem. So he's like, look, you have a disease. It's incurable. You're going to have this for life. If you don't take this medication, you're going to be in a wheelchair by the time you're 35. And that's the way it is. And he's like, your problem is you don't believe it. And I was like, you're right. I don't believe it. I don't believe this is it. I just always had that feeling deep within me that I'm meant for more than just a slow deterioration to death. There's got to be more to this.
And if you also not believe, so I get that you didn't believe that there had to be more to, this isn't all there is. I'm not just going to deteriorate in a wheelchair, which is a horrible, thing to say to somebody. But I get that, but was there a glimmer in you that knew there had to be something missing? Was there a glimmer in that? Because I can relate to that in my own trauma story. I knew that the answer was never going to be out there. I knew it was going to be in here.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes a while to get there. Every single thing comes from the inside out. Sometimes you need outside help because you don't know what you don't know,
and
right?
You need that inside. Yeah.
But it always is within. And so, as a side note, people often say to me, can you help me? Can you heal me? Can you? No. That's what I can hand you the tools. I know exactly where you're at in the healing process and give you the correct tool for that moment. And it's up to you to use it. And so that's the biggest thing. It's always from the inside out, always. And so
isn't that the best type of healing, isn't it, Kirsten? But because what you're doing there is creating sovereignty and agency. And when you've sovereignty and agency, then there's power. When there's sovereignty and agency in self, then there's control.
Yeah.
Then you can course correct, then you can chart your way. But
Yeah.
which is why, you know, even within my work, I would never call myself a healer, because I don't. I facilitate, I create the container for it, but I'm a catalyst. But isn't there great power in that?
It's amazing. And that's the biggest thing, is it really does come from the inside out. But sometimes so often I find people that go through the autoimmune experience, they have to discover that as they go along. Often when I work with people, they are in a desperate state where it's like, that's their rock bottom. And now they're ready to find that inner power.
Yes. And they turn in and ask the questions: what has downregulated my genes? What has affected me? Because that's a huge question, and it's sore to answer, isn't it?
Yeah, it was been more difficult to answer until more recently, as now we're starting to understand the brain-body connection, and actually going even further than that, in changing our mindset that the brain and body are separate at all, that it's a whole organism going on. There is several parts of our bodies that actually have other thinking systems, other brain systems that just don't talk. They speak differently. They speak through feeling. They speak through triggered emotions. And so it's learning now to, it's our entrainment to disregard those things. And now we're getting to the point where it's like, oh, wow, we're missing really powerful indicators.
And so is that your own journey then, to turn in and begin to see what was happening within yourself? Is that
yeah. And so I basically then and there in that office, when he told me I had a mental health issue yet again, I then and there said, I'm going to do anything and everything I can to heal myself permanently, to cure myself. And like you were talking about that glimmer underneath, I had it the whole time. There was something in me that said, you are not doing this just for you. You are doing this for so many other people. And I just knew it. And truly, I had no idea this is what I would end up doing. And yet I just knew that healing was going to be so empowering to other people as well. And it really kept me going. And yet it was not a fun and easy path. It was awful. Living with this disease, as it progressively got worse, it's like living in a human torture chamber 24/7, and you can barely sleep either. So it's like, the only way I can really describe it is it's like someone taking crowbars between each one of your joints and trying to pry them apart. And so living through it, it's a true dark night of the soul. There's no escape. You can't take a break from it. Even sleep isn't a break. It's like living in a nightmare. And so going through that and struggling, I spent over $150,000 of my own money. I'm now at $270,000, but now all the further exploration I do is just gravy and fun. But then it was life or death.
Wow.
And so I basically was just earning money to try and find answers. And I would say a small percentage of the money that I spent gave any type of result. It was one of those things, because there I was going out in the world, trying to find all of these things, and it was within me, but I needed to go out there to have the triggers for the internal.
And
so,
what did you find that made the difference? What was it within that made the difference?
Yeah. So for me, it was hitting rock bottom, as people just need to do. And everybody's rock bottom is different. But typically what it is you go through, you start having the symptoms and you wait for your diagnosis thinking that's going to do something. Then you get the diagnosis, and then nothing happens. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to get the medication. I'll get on the right medication and then I'm going to feel better. And then that doesn't work. And, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to try chiropractic. I'm going to do acupuncture. And that's not to put any of these modalities down. There's so many wonderful attributes to them, but that's you compartmentalize your own health and you're jumping from place to place. Even when you start feeling better, you don't really know why. And so like you're talking about, there's no control. Yeah. There's no autonomy. There's no sovereignty in your healing. And so therefore no power. And so the same thing, I did that for 7.5 years, just round and round and round and getting progressively worse. I changed my diet a million times. At one point I was vegan, gluten-free. It was the worst year of my life. And so I just got to the point where I was so deteriorated. I hit my rock bottom. I had been told I needed 4 of my joints replaced, that they were done. And I had such bad sciatica. It was down to my ankle. I couldn't stand for longer than 5 minutes. I couldn't walk for longer than 5 minutes. And I couldn't lie down for longer than 5 minutes. It was just a nightmare. And my family had been traveling and we were in an airport. And by the time I made it through security, it was a long line. I just had tears streaming down my face because I was just in excruciating pain. And the woman was like, what's going on here? And so my then husband kind of explained, that I was dealing with an illness. And she's like, ma'am, I'm going to have to insist we get you a wheelchair. And it was like that moment. I had kept hope alive until that moment, just persevering through sheer will. And that's when I let go. It's usually when you hit your moment to surrender, because I had no choice. There I was in the wheelchair. Wow. Like they told me I was going to be, and looking over at my 2 daughters, their little faces, worried, and it was just awful. And in that moment, I began to just silently pray to myself and just said, God, source, universe, whatever you want me to call you, please, if I'm meant to overcome this, please send me answers. And if I'm not, let this be over. I was just ready to go. I had faced my death so many times at that point that it was becoming like I would rather be over there.
Rather than have to love this cycle of hope and despair and hope and despair and hope and despair. Yeah.
And it was like living, and I would kept going for the sake of my daughters, but it was getting to the point where I felt like I was more of a burden to them than a benefit. Yeah. And so in that moment, though, I felt an energy come up through my body, and it was just this most amazing, surreal moment. And I'll never forget it. It was just one of those moments. And I knew that I was going to start finding answers. I just knew it. And sure enough, the next day I did. I started finding answers, and then it started to go click, 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 click. And I started to get better and better and better.
And what was the first answer that you find?
So the first answer I found was nutrition. And it's actually what I start people with now, because it's the most accessible. You have, where you have a lot of control over what you put in your mouth. So this is where you actually start to gain that control and sovereignty. And people often go to the nutrition, and it is not the end all be all, but it's a really good, strong piece of that puzzle. And so that's where I started. I just had this feeling to Google a nutritionist that had cured themselves of an autoimmune condition. And I found one, and she had cured herself of MS. Yeah. And that blew my mind, because I thought MS was like the most difficult one to cure. And here she is, fully functioning and now helping others. And so I went through her program, and then I bought her proprietary process from her to teach.
Yeah. Brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah. So nutrition was the first thing. And then after that
was first. And then it was the mental health piece. I'd kind of been doing that along the way anyway, but it was really realizing how I spoke to myself. And having those aha moments And, I already had my PhD in metaphysics at that time. So I had a lot of training and education and a lot of tools that I was able to access.
Yeah.
And that now made sense. And so the biggest thing too is getting out of that brain fog piece is the first part, and nutrition really helps with that. And because
the nutrition lifted the brain fog and got you some sort of level of kind of some sort of equilibrium, some sort of system. And
it helps move it in the right direction. Yeah.
And the mental health piece was that the biggest piece? Because that's often where the trauma piece is often the biggest piece that downregulates the genes.
Yeah. So that's it. It's coming into alignment with yourself and bringing those systems back online. And it's not just one aspect. And that's the thing. So that's why our program is 9 months long, because it's not only do you want to move into remission, you want to stay there. You want to, and now keep moving and keep that momentum going to transform your life. Because it's not just about being out of illness. Healing is a natural side effect. Your body knows how to heal itself. When you take away all those layers that are in the way of your health, and then you bombard yourself with healthful tools, healing just happens.
Okay, it's spontaneous.
It just starts. It just like bit by bit, day by day, drip by drip. All of a sudden, one day you wake up and you're like, whoa, I feel good. I feel good.
But the work to do that must be dedicated work, because I know from our work, there's 3 very strong pieces of the puzzle when we're dealing with trauma and preparation. The prepping the mind and the body for access to the woundedness is massive. Finding the woundedness, the primary woundedness, not the secondary woundedness, is a massive. And then the healing happens as a spontaneous response to the prior 2 stages. Healing nearly takes on its own, the healing of the mind and the body nearly takes on its own way of being once those 2 stages are in place. So I hear you saying something different, but when you talk about the mental health aspect, I suppose our listeners will be really interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of that. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, it was starting to face and take responsibility for the decisions I made, even if I was victimized. And it's like, and also recognizing my own innocence. And so it's a twofold. It's taking that responsibility. Like, I will take responsibility for everything that is going on within my life. And also the kindness and compassion for myself and forgiveness of myself for, yes, of course you made those decisions when you didn't know any better. Of course you did. And so.
And do you find that with other women, do you find that the trauma piece is about understanding what is happening within?
Yeah. So every single thing we do is teaching about what's going on coming from the inside out, because then you, like you were talking about, it's like you develop that self-power. That's how healing happens, is reclaiming your power or claiming it for the first time in your life, which is often the case.
Because you do, there's a protocol in your healing called the awareness protocol, isn't that right?
Yeah, awareness therapy.
Yeah. So tell us a wee bit about that and how that links into this stage of the process.
So this is actually something that I discovered from going through my experience. And then when I went through formal education, had more of a vocabulary to discuss it. And so awareness, essentially, we can call it mindfulness, but that word is just so used in so many different contexts.
And it's so used for bypassing. Awareness as a tool for healing is different from mindfulness as used as a tool for bypassing. They're 2 different things.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and awareness is allowing things to be, no matter what they are, is essentially what it breaks down to. That's the simplest form of it. And so it's watching yourself, being the witnesser, stepping into your consciousness instead of letting the brain be the one in control. And so the brain's going to say and do and chatter all the live long day. And, even if you're the most enlightened being, that brain is still chattering. And so that's, I think, one of the things with Awareness is, it's just paying attention, doing dishes, being there, doing the dishes, watching what thoughts are coming up in the mind. And it's like, oh, look at what I just said to myself. Like, oh, can't even scrub a dish right. Like, oh, look at, and it's like being really more curious about how your brain's thinking. It's like, oh, where did that thought come from? Did I put that thought there? Is it true?
Isn't that incredibly important? Because I think there's two major components of healing mental health. And one of them is metacognition, and the other one is introspection. Now they meet each other, because metacognition is thinking about your thinking, and introspection is being aware of what your body is doing as that process of thinking happens. It is full psychosomatic unity fundamentally.
Totally.
Prior to that, if you don't have those two fundamental functions, or they're actually skills, you have to be taught them. You have them at birth, but you're disempowered from them as you grow up. If you don't have those skills, then you do not know the energy in your body that your mind is producing that downregulates your brain, your genes. You don't have that availability to that. So awareness is the first stage of understanding what is this energy like in my body? What's the emotion? What's the dynamics? And that's what I hear you saying. Am I understanding that?
Yeah, you've got that bang on, because essentially what this is often people who are experiencing mental distress, anxiety, depression, or physical distress and illnesses, they typically are looking to their environment for how to think, feel, and be. It's been entrained in them. And so it's like, I will make sure that everything's perfect in my environment, and that I behave a certain way to ensure that people don't act, so it's this walking on eggshells kind of situation.
I will manage my external world, and I manage my internal, but I don't understand what my internal world is doing. So the only way I can manage my internal is to manage the external, and the pressure of that's horrendous.
Yeah, well, it is, because you don't know how people are going to respond. You don't know what's going to happen. And so this is the thing. And because people have been so entrained out of that and into being, especially as women, and men too, but especially as women, just how our society is set up. So again, we're not going to say this is bad or good, or it just is. And so we're changing it. And so, and how do we do that? Awareness. And so that's it, is just when people start bringing their attention internally, it's new to them. They're like, whoa. And because they're so used to being in responding and reacting to the environment around them to feel safe. And now it's like, I'm going within to find that. And so awareness helps people naturally do that and come within themselves.
And that's such a, anybody listening to this now, we've probably been, funnily enough, going for about 40 minutes here, which is just feels like 5 minutes. I don't know about you. Hopefully to the audience. But anybody's listening to this, what you're saying, and what I'm fundamentally agreeing with, is that there is this inner energy that is created by our woundedness, by our trauma, and that is the energy that downgrades the genes. But if that energy, you aren't an awareness of that, somatically, emotionally, physiologically, then how do you ever stop it? And you would be swayed then to take all the drugs. You would be swayed into the medical pathologizing model, because what else is the answer?
Yeah, well, and that's it. And you're not told about any of them. And, it seems like a big conspiracy, but it's true. Our medical system was hijacked and it's for profit. And so there's nothing wrong with charging for your services. But when you want to actually bring benefit, but that system isn't set up that way. It's set up to
keep you there.
Just work with the symptoms, but it's not meant to actually help someone overcome. And it's meant, so it's like, you don't get paid if people get better. In a system like that.
We call primary and secondary pain and trauma. And a lot of what happens in trauma work is that the secondary pain of the trauma is the presentation issues. And that secondary pain is often what is treated or pathologized. It is often what the DSM will tick as a problem. So the secondary pain is never the problem. It's the product of the problem. But there's a lot of money in secondary pain. There's a lot of, and we can keep people trapped in a lifetime of secondary pain and a lifetime of service in secondary pain. And so what I hear you saying is that exactly that, but for physical ailments, which is often the secondary pain of this trauma that we have within us.
Yes.
And an entire medical system serving that actual physical secondary pain. Incredible.
Yeah. And I mean, and why would it stop until people demand differently? You know, and that's it. So that's why it's nothing to villainize. It's evolution. This is what we do. We try things out, see what works, see what doesn't work, and then we change. And so that's what we're doing now.
It is difficult, but isn't it, Kirsten? Because I'm at the other end of that from a mental health perspective. I am, saying, no, it doesn't work. What you're doing doesn't work. We don't have an epidemic of mental health. What we have is we have a training issue because we need to understand how to treat this stuff differently. And so
absolutely
treat it differently, the same as that you're saying exactly the same thing. So back to autoimmune, because you and I can talk for hours, which is our first experience. So back to autoimmune. So when that trauma is released, work through broad awareness too, when you're dissolving and removing the patterns, I'm assuming that's the stage. What was that experience like for you, and what was happening with your symptoms in relation to that stuff?
Yeah. So there's been so many steps and facets along the way, because the way I look at it with me is, at first I was stumbling through the dark and just like trying to find things, and then it was like all of a sudden I had a flashlight and I was kind of pointing at different items, and then so that's the stage I was at when I was going through this. Now, how I would explain it to someone is totally different, because the switch has been flipped off and I can see everything.
Exactly the steps and stages.
Yeah. So at the time, it was a lot of still fumbling around, and I would just kind of bump into things, and it was like, and it was the awareness piece really started to bring that, and my training, because I was so well trained already, I had the vocabulary and understanding when these things came up. And so it was just really noticing the self-criticism and self-talk. I started talking to myself like I was a 3-year-old little girl. Like, oh my gosh, it's okay, sweetheart. We all make mistakes. That's fine. And if you don't do that today, you'll do it tomorrow. It's totally okay. And it's funny because when you start talking to yourself that way, two things happen. You notice in your external environment how other people are talking and where that inner voice came from. And so you really start to be like, and then you notice the way you speak to other people changes, because you're being so kind to yourself internally. Even how, I was always one of those people that even if I had inner dialogue about something going on about someone else, I wouldn't even dare say it. I wouldn't even dream of saying something mean to somebody, I also had zero skills at establishing boundaries in a way that were healthy. And so that was the kickstart for that.
It sounds to me like when you're listening to that self-talk, we call it the wisdom of the wound. So you can extend that to understand that the wound just isn't self-talk, but it'll be berating, it'll be downplaying you, it'll be taking away your power, it'll have so much language that's so unique to each and every one individual. I know you're doing a great job here at explaining your self-talk. Self-talk tends to have its roots in the woundedness, its roots in the trauma, its roots in the place that you've got yourself to in terms of relationships via the trauma, doesn't it? It's a real good awareness piece for what is going on in me, what I believe about myself, what I feel about myself, what I think about myself.
And so the psychosomatic chemical reason for this, I'm sure people would love to know. So that's what we'll get into, is how the thoughts literally become things in your body and how it creates disease in the brain and body.
Right.
And so there's this beautiful book called Molecules of Emotion, and it's written by this, what is her? I can't remember her name at the moment. Sorry about that. But
we'll drop the link in the show notes.
She's a beautiful, amazing female scientist who has just done groundbreaking work. And she did all of this research to realize what how this chemical interaction of emotions works. So what happens is we have thoughts or feelings come up in our body, and then the body produces a neuropeptide, which is a little molecule. And that molecule is made up of certain elements. And what happens is it then goes and connects to the cell. And it's this beautiful way that it happens. So there's receptors on all of our cells, and they shimmy and shake, and they wait for a neuropeptide to come by and give them information. And so the neuropeptide will connect in, and it's like they bond together, and it has to fit. And so when the neuropeptide comes in, it fits in like a key. And when it goes click, then the information comes from the neuropeptide into the cell, and that communicates to the cell what to do and gives it information. Well, when we're in fight or flight, you can imagine what neuropeptides are being released, and this constant form of anxiety. So now these neuropeptides are being released, connecting to these cells, and that's where the degeneration comes of the genes because of the information that's coming in. But how do we stop that? So this is another interesting thing about human beings that are very different than any other animal, because we have this conscious awareness. We have extra neurons and different DNA that there is no other species on the planet that matches. We have very unique DNA. And so what happens when an animal goes through a traumatic experience, so say a deer gets chased by a mountain lion and it's a near miss, the deer will then go, when it's safe, it will run it out. It will run out the experience. And that actually moves those neuropeptides out of the cells and clears them. Well,
it runs out the epinephrine, it runs out the cortisol, it runs out all of the stuff that's just for the endocrine system. Okay.
So it clears those cells. And so that now they're back into healthy expression, and the deer goes about their business like nothing ever happened. Well, humans are different. First of all, we have memory storage, and it's like we remember all the things that happened. And typically as we store memories that want to protect us from future pain. So what happens is, in our cells, in our bodies, very different situation. Our bodies are so intelligent that they go, I'm going to hang on to these neuropeptides in these cells until I'm in a safe environment. So don't worry, I got you. I'm going to hold on to this. And yet what happens is sometimes we're in situations where we're not in a safe environment, or because of our past experiences, our brains trick our bodies into feeling like they're not in a safe environment. And so what happens is we end up with all these neuropeptides attached to these cells that are not releasing, constantly sending that information to the cell. So that's why you can do the nutrition program all you want. You can do, you can do the exercise, you can take the pills. Nothing's going to change unless you clear those neuropeptides from your cells.
And that clear in the emotion and clear in the endocrine system that is connected to the emotion, and clear all of the energy and all of the byproducts of this emotion that creates these neuropeptides. That's what regulates the gene. So working in the emotional content and the mind's content, both mind and body, not just the body.
Yeah, whole meal deal.
Whole meal deal. It's so funny you're saying that, but because the model that we're bringing to the world, I'm saying, can we not have an adult conversation about the complexity of the human condition? Can we
Yeah.
please have a conversation about
Yeah.
the interplay between the mind and the body? Can we stop saying it's all about the body? It's all about the body.
Yeah.
And can we stop saying it's all about the mind? It's all about,
Yeah.
can we talk about the interplay? And that's exactly what you're doing here. You're saying
Yeah.
it's all about the totality of the inner experience, both mind, body, and these neuropeptides that actually downgrade these genes that cause the illness in us. And there's the perfect example of why the trauma work releases and gets rid and upgrades the genes now, because there's new neuropeptides with information.
Yeah, totally. And that's it. So it's like when you know how to clear them, then you're now moving through, and then you add more skills. So you're moving more and more into a state of symbiosis. And it's not that you don't have negative thoughts. It's not that, these things continue on. It's an endless journey, and that's it. There's no destination here. The whole point of living life is living life. There's,
But in saying that, yes, there's no destination, but the space that is created in your body for joy and freedom, and because your energy is not being caught in the pain, it's not being caught in the illness. It's so yes, we have work to do. Yes, and are always clear and work out, but you've more space than you obviously.
Oh, totally. You just get better and better and better and better and better until you do hit a point where majority of the time you are living in love, joy, peace, and bliss. And most people, including myself, didn't even know that was an option.
Yes.
And so now having that experience and living in that day to day,
and that's not a bypassed experience. That's not an enlightened bypassed experience where we're saying, let's pretend we don't know what's going on in the mind and body and just love enlightenment, because that body information will road truck you. That's where you get.
Oh, yeah.
That's because you're sitting on a volcano in this bypassed world. Yeah. That's when autoimmune is more likely, actually, and out of those places. Is that
totally
fair, Kristin?
Oh, yes, I can attest to, because I work with so many women with autoimmune, is this feeling of density. So the feeling just dense and heavy and bogged down. It literally is. Your cells are literally bogged down. It's real. And so this is the thing is, and then being told over and over, oh, that you're just crazy, or it must be in your head, or it can't be that bad. And like, so when we're talking about the secondary wounding, that's what happens, because in the trauma work I do with abused women and children, we call it secondary victimization. So it's like you get re-victimized as you're going through things. And so it's back to that with the feeling the density and like tenseness, and so that's part of it. And
it's an real experience, internalized experience that your clients are saying, I feel heavy, I feel dense, I feel weighty, I feel, because they're actually feeling it in their bodies. It's actually an unreal situation.
Totally. And most often people say, like, I don't know how to feel joy anymore. It's like, I really miss those times where I would get excited about things. I would be, it's just like, I don't remember the last time I just laughed, because nothing is fun anymore. And so that's the biggest thing, is when we do the work, it's like the only way out is through. You have to do it. And so you can prolong it by doing all these other things. And so when I talk about going to the chiropractor and going to the acupuncturist, that actually is most helpful when you're already going through the healing experience, because now there's room for that to work. But when you're totally bogged down and so in such a dense state, nothing really works, because nothing is working. Your systems are not working.
And I have a question that keeps repeating in my head for some of our listeners that I know that they might be asking, is in the release of these neuropeptides. And when we talk about sending new information through the way we speak to ourselves, through what we will call clearing, through the clearing of the woundedness, we're creating new neuropeptides which send new signals to the genes.
Yeah.
Is there any movement practices? Is there any physical movement that is also a good fit? It's just a question. I have no knowledge of this, so it's a genuine question.
It's a great question. So the more muscle, this is, there's a lot of scientific studies around this. And so the stronger the muscle, the healthier the being. And even if you look at two women, 80 years old, side by side, one is so overweight and the other one is thin and eats well.
Yeah.
And yet this person that's overweight is so much healthier because they exercise every day. So truly, and that's where it gets really to be a catch-22 when you're physically ill, because it ends up being more of this thing, because it's rebuilding that. It's use it or lose it. So we can build muscle at any time in our lives. There is no time where it's not possible, but building that muscle really helps maintain the health, because it really helps move fluid through the body. Moving through fluid through the body is the best way to clear. And so sweat, crying, and actually laughter, because of the endorphins that it releases, that helps get things moving. And so exercise, movement any way you can. Swimming is really great way to get these things moving. There's specific breath techniques you can do that help move that. And then, yes, and then what you're going to do is, as you're moving those neuropeptides, like you said, we're going to really literally rewire and restructure the brain as we go.
Yeah, brilliant. So what we have here is we're going to have to call this a day. It's now you're on there, but I have so much questions. What we're talking about is, first of all, you're talking about nutrition, because obviously we understand how sugar signals genes. We understand, and I am a sugar addict. If once I get a bit of sugar, I can't. It's nearly like an addiction for me. And I have to be very careful, because I understand how that downregulates genes, how that plays in my body in terms of how that could signal all sorts of craziness. So nutrition is the first thing. Then it is the mind-body health. And the reason I said that, not mental health, is because we're talking about the woundedness that lies within, that speaks through the mind. So it's clearing all of that. And then all of the exercises, all of the physicality, all of the movement, all of the building, and getting these neuropeptides moving through the body and getting released physically.
Yeah. And there's multiple techniques, and some people are going to resonate with more than others. And so that's it. So although people will get all the tools they need, they'll pick the ones that work best with them. And that's the biggest thing, is this empowerment piece again, is putting people in charge of their own healing. It's like, here's the tools, here's the skills, here's the support. When you're stuck, I'm here to support you and help you through. And community.
I'm going to push you again on something, because I know I have someone in mind, right? And I know that they have done an awful lot of the inner work.
Yeah.
They have been asking and saying to me, is there trauma yoga that gets to release? She's been saying this for a long time. We've been having these private conversations, and she has some idea that she needs to move stuff out of her body physically. And you've just hit the nail on the head. I think what you're saying is some of these peptides need moved out. Some of these, so she needs to do some work to move that out of her body. Could that be the case?
Oh yeah. And that's it. So it's like, what you're going to do, what you'll notice is when you try different techniques, and then you'll see which ones work best for you. There's some that typically work well with everybody. And then there's other ones where someone's just like, wow, like a huge difference in my life.
Yeah.
And so, and that's often why people start feeling better when they have one of those aha moments, like the epiphany moments, and realization, where their awareness does just go click. Is you think about what's being flooded into the body. All of these healthful neurochemicals are being flooded into the body. So that's why it's really important to move out the other ones, because what receptors are they going to connect to in your cells? if the other ones are still sitting there. So we got to move them out.
Brilliant. And we'll link all of this to in the show notes. And do you have resources? Do you have a place where people, excuse me, do you have a place where people can come? Do you have a place where people can visit? Do you have because I'm sure this will enliven a lot of people's, especially, you know, we're based in Ireland, although we have a worldwide audience. But this stuff's seldomly talked about. I mean, seldomly understood, seldomly. I think there's probably a lot more room in America for this stuff than there is here.
Yeah, and same with us. We work with people from all over the world, and most of this news is new news to people. And it was new news to me. The only, you know, one of the reasons that I've been able to discover a lot of this is because I have a PhD in metaphysical science. No one goes that route. I was supposed to go to medical school and I dropped out. And I'm glad I did, because that wasn't my path. I mean, beautiful people that do go that path and that they dedicate their lives that way. And I'm so glad I went my weird little wild way, because it unlocked so much, because I studied the basic nature of things, you know, the real fundamentals of how things work. And when we seek the truth for truth's sake, it's not always going to sound good to people. They're not always going to like it. And that's just going to have to be okay.
Yeah, and I can so agree and concur with that, because that's certainly my journey as well. I think that's where we have met this wonderful connection. You see, now I'm really concerned. It's now 10 past and we're like 110 minutes into this. But, you know, when you find a new way, and you find a new way that is contradictory to the way that is always set, you call it pioneering, I call it torture.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Every day it's worth it, because you get to live as close to your essence as possible, and you get to help as many people as you can as possible in this new way. And I agree with you. I think, you know, 20, 30 years from now, the work that we're doing on the ground will set the chart for the work that comes ahead, because we're speaking the same language, we're using different pieces of terminology, but we're fundamentally, and maybe the trauma work that I do is a tad deeper, but it doesn't matter. It's all of the same stuff. It's all awareness. It's all mind-body unity. We're kind of converging the same information. And now we've got hours and hours and hours of clinical practice, and so much clinical outcomes that we're saying, don't believe me, believe this.
Believe the results.
Yes.
That's it. It's like, you know, and when I first started doing this, I was like, what am I doing? You know, it was just because people just kept saying to me, like, you need to be doing this. You need to be teaching this. And I was like, you know what, maybe I do. And so when I was first at it, I wasn't all that confident at what I do. But like you said, once you've gone through it, and I've been through this now with hundreds of people, and the results speak for themselves. And so that's the thing. It's like, well, no one can tell me otherwise now, because I've seen so many lives transformed, so many people that were completely hopeless, that, you know, that couldn't even sleep at night because they were just riddled with anxiety, depression, and physical pain. And now they're making plans, they're organizing, they're running around, they're just loving their life for the first time in their entire lives. I'm like, if I could have do that for one person, this whole thing would have been worth it. And now it's hundreds. So you know what? I'm going to keep going. And yeah, I definitely get some shade. I'm on the internet and people throw hate my way all the live long day. But that's because they don't know, and they want a better life. And they're just not at the point yet where they're ready to believe they can have it. And that's not personal.
You know, and I love this as an ending, because this is the title of this podcast: Healing at Last. Believing that healing at last is possible, because hope is the spark of the beginning of the journey. If you've got hope, then you will, if you've got hope, even in the dark moments, then if you hope that healing is possible, then you'll find that way. You'll turn on that light. You'll go towards the tunnel with a wee bit of light. You'll go towards the people that are talking about healing. You'll go And that's all that this podcast was ever designed to do and to be. It was a beacon of hope, and to spread hope about all multiple things that we can heal from. I hope we've done ourselves proud this afternoon. And I hope that we've served the audience. And I wonder if they've any questions, or I wonder if you're listening to this, get in contact. If you've any more questions, send them Kirsten's way. I will link out in the show notes the book that you mentioned. I will link out any resources. I'll link out her page. I'll link out anything that will, if you've got autoimmune and you think, oh my God, I need this, then I will link this out. And anything that we've mentioned that I think might be resourceful on our end. And what I'll link out in this as well is we have a wee mini course of understanding your emotional world, which may be useful to anybody, because that's the beginning of awareness for, as you say, Kirsten. So hopefully we've done our job. I think we could have went off in a 9 million tangents.
Yes, and we'll just do it again when we'll go on another tangent. And that's the thing, is there's a reason why my program too is it's a year long, and then sometimes people stay even longer because they love it there. But we're a big family. But the thing is healing and creating and transforming our lives, it takes a minute. It's a step-by-step process, and it's a whole new world of experience.
It's so possible. And what's amazing about that is, look at every structure in the mind and the body. It's all capable. Look at the neuroplasticity in the mind. Look at the down regulation of a gene, which can also return to normal. Look at the capacity in the system for healing. And all that we're doing here in this podcast is talking about and I know it's not possible to give all of it. Like we can't get into that. We can only just skim the surface. But I think we did ourselves proud here, and I hope we served the audience well by pulling out the pieces. And if anybody wants us to work or come back at a particular, have questions, and I have loads of questions, and I can ask Kirsten questions in an interview that we can do again. So if you're listening to this, send us an email, send us messages. And I can certainly come back and we can do this again if this has enlivened your interest. So all that's left to say, an hour and 15 minutes later, we said half an hour. I said to my husband, I think it might be half an hour. See you in half an hour. Don't think so. I should have known, Kirsten. I should have known. So what's left to say is thank you for your wonderful knowledge and your wonderful energy and your wonderful mission in life that is serving you well and all your clients. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Today. Thank you.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, my dear, I will chat to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody. Remember, all of the details are in the show notes, and if you have any questions, just reach out.